this afternoon, President Biden delivered his first remarks since the swift fall of Afghanistan to the Taliban. The rapid deterioration happened as the U.S. moved to remove all embassy and support staff from the country. The president says he stands by his controversial decision to withdraw, but acknowledged his administration was caught off guard at how quickly the country collapsed.
The truth is, this did unfold more quickly than we had anticipated. The Afghan military collapsed, sometime without trying to fight. American troops cannot and should not be fighting in a war and dying in a war that Afghan forces are not willing to fight for themselves.
And joining us with more are John Mearsheimer, professor of political science at the University of Chicago and a foreign policy specialist, Cecile Shea, a non-resident senior fellow on security and diplomacy at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, Alberto Cole, professor of law and U.S. foreign relations at DePaul University, and Khalil Marar, associate professor at Governors State University with a specialty in foreign policy and terrorism. Welcome all of you back to Chicago tonight. Cecile Shea, I'll start with you. Why, after 20-plus years of combat, do you believe the country fell so quickly to the Taliban upon American withdrawal?
Well, I happen to be one of the people who think that it was inevitable. And indeed, when I served in a senior position in the U.S. Embassy in Islamabad, the Pakistanis would tell us daily that one way or the other, eventually the U.S. was going to pull out of Afghanistan and they were going to be dealing with a Taliban-led government there. And that was one reason why the Pakistanis were constantly hedging their bets through these whole 20 years. So I don't think anyone is surprised that it happened. It happened very quickly. It happened in weeks. I mean, one of the questions people are asking is if we had pulled out in the winter rather than the summer, would that have slowed it down? But really, once it became clear that the warlords were changing sides, and really once it became clear that the government was getting on airplanes and flying away, it was inevitable it was going to happen quickly. People just saw the writing on the wall, frankly.
John, and as we look at these chaotic scenes from the Kabul airport, John Mearsheimer, was there anything the Biden administration or the previous Trump administration could have done to ease this withdrawal, or do you agree with Cecile Shea that these scenes were inevitable?
Well, I don't think these particular scenes were inevitable. If the Trump administration had been in power and they had anticipated how quickly the Taliban would win, or if the Biden administration had been able to anticipate how quick Taliban would win, this obviously wouldn't have happened. But there were very few people who thought that the Taliban would win so quickly. And you want to remember that the Biden administration had an incentive not bail out quickly, not to prepare for the exits quickly, because that would guarantee that the Afghani military would collapse. So they waited to the last moment, and that came back because in the end, the Afghani military just collapsed very quickly, and we have this messy situation.
And Khalil Marar, why do you believe there was such little resistance from the Afghani military, 300,000 strong, that the U.S. had invested billions in to stop the Taliban, as the president kind of pointed his finger in that direction, and at Afghan political leaders for failing to stop the Taliban? Why do you believe that is?
You know, I agree with both Cecile and John at the outset. And to answer your very excellent question, Paris, I would say that the Taliban has conviction, and this alliance, this loose coalition, of which 90% of that military is actually illiterate. They cannot read, cannot write, basically folds because not only do they lack conviction, but they have no faith, they have no confidence in the corrupt regime that existed in Kabul until today. And with this idea that the country fell, I would completely disagree. I don't think that Afghanistan has ever been governed by any one party. The Taliban happens to control more monopoly on violence. Monopoly on violence is something that is sort of a realm, if you will. It's quantifiable. There's a quality of it. Nobody has ever controlled the country. And the Kabul regime folded so quickly because the people that it governed lacked conviction, lacked faith in it. They have less faith, even less faith in the Taliban to have good governance. but they have more faith in the Taliban's ability to exercise violence, to kill them, to hurt them.
And what you're saying here is this wasn't exactly a politically stable situation before this withdrawal happened. Let's hear what President Biden said about a month ago on his thoughts of the Taliban coming in and overtaking the country.
The jury is still out, but the likelihood there's going to be the Taliban overrunning everything and owning the whole country is highly unlikely.
Clearly not the case. Alberto Cole, should there have been strong U.S. intelligence that indicated that Afghan security forces would not hold for very long and that this was a likely outcome?
This is a terrible disaster for American foreign policy, and I think we should judge the administration by their own metrics. Metric number one, they said they're going to work closely with allies. The decision to pull out of Afghanistan and to do it so quickly and to implement and follow up on the ill-advised Trump plan was done without consulting in great depth with our NATO allies. So there goes metric number one. Metric number two, they pride themselves on competence. You cannot see anything more incompetently managed than this withdrawal. Metric number three, supposedly we are going to be leading. What kind of leadership is this when we make this decision in such a rash way based on this weird obsession of wrapping up the withdrawal by September 11th? Metric number four, the administration is supposed to care about human rights and particularly about women's rights. And we are about to hand over, we're already handing over millions of Afghan girls and women to the most misogynistic, horrible regime one could imagine in the world, even worse than those of Iran and Saudi Arabia. By the administration's own metrics, this is a horrible failure, and it will impact our credibility, both with our allies and our adversaries.
The regime you're referring to, of course, the Taliban, which was in power from 96 to 2001 until after 9/11, then the U.S. First invaded. Cecile Shea, remind us who they are and what kind of leadership that country can expect under Taliban rule again.
Sure, and I just want to add one thing to what Alberto just said. I mean, really, this president had the same choice in the end as his two predecessors, which is either stay or go. You know, there was no halfway. And now we know why, despite the fact that President Obama promised to get out and didn't get out, and President Trump promised to get out, started to get out, but didn't complete the job. It's because it was always going to be very difficult and always lead to a lot of suffering, which leads us to your question, Paris. Taliban literally means students. You know, in Yiddish, these would be yeshiva bookers. So, but a group of deeply religious people that has always attracted a lot of psychopaths. And that is not in any way to say that all Taliban are sociopaths or psychopaths. A lot of them are just there for the job. The Taliban pays a lot better than the competitors, both in Afghanistan and in Pakistan. Some of them are there because they have leadership. And if you want to be a leader in a lot of parts of this country, then you're going to join the Taliban. But they are religiously fanatic. Even Iran says that they go too far. So that's really telling you something. They are Sunnis. They are primarily Pashtun, which means that they hold a lot of cultural views toward women that are not even Islamic. So a lot of their views and hardcore beliefs about women come from their Pashtun background, not really from Islam itself.
Justification for invasion 20 years ago was that they harbored Al-Qaeda terrorists. John Mearsheimer, there are some in the political or military class that believe that the U.S. presence there, albeit small, did stabilize the country. Do you believe there might have been anything to gain by maintaining some kind of small presence in Afghanistan?
Well, the problem is, Paris, that one was doomed from the start, and for basically the same reasons that Khalil was pointing out before. The United States invaded Afghanistan, toppled the Taliban, and then it made the crucial mistake of staying there and trying to turn the place into a liberal democracy. And when we did that, we were doomed because we became an occupier and we got engaged in the business of social engineering in a foreign country. And the fact is that the Taliban had widespread support in the population, and the government, the Afghani government, was joined at the hip with the United States, and as a result, it did not have a lot of legitimacy. And at the same time, we were funneling huge amounts of money to that government and to the which led to corruption, which led to less faith among the people in the Afghani government. And in the end, this ended up just like Vietnam. I'm old enough to remember, this is Vietnam all over again.
And a lot of people, a lot of folks have made that comparison. Khalil Maher, there are many folks in Afghanistan trying to evacuate not just American diplomatic personnel, but Afghans who assisted Americans, translators. How difficult will it be to get them out of there and to get them some kind of asylum in the U.S.?
It's logistically nearly impossible at this point. I mean, Western governments are trying to get our own personnel out, number one. Number two, the Afghan people, you heard about the incident with the C-130, heartbreaking, devastating, of people trying to flee the country. It won't be hard once we get them here. Getting them out of there is exactly the problem. And how do you choose? We have a border with Mexico, for example, where, the previous president was talking about building a wall. The current president has no idea what to do about it. I mean, the truth is, we have to look at what the, not just optics are, but what John points to, what rebuilding a country means. The country remains largely unbuilt. The Taliban is taking over. Now, with that said, this is not our daddy's Taliban. I mean, this is 20 years ago, the Taliban is fundamentally different than the Taliban of today. We can talk about that later. But to answer your question bluntly, Paris, we can basically give them all asylum. The political feasibility and the logistics would be a nightmare.
And Alberto Cole, tell us what the future has in store with a Taliban-led Afghanistan, not just for Afghanistan, but for the United States, for Western alliances, because the fear is that they could, again, harbor terrorist elements that would be a threat to the United States.
Yes, so I mean, precisely because the Taliban are a collection of warlords, you will see eventually happen what happened over 20 years ago, which is some of the warlords in the more remote areas of Afghanistan, and Afghanistan is a huge country, very rugged, very mountainous. Some of them will find it in their interest because of money or ideological reasons or a mix of different factors to harbor and give refuge not only to Al-Qaeda-like elements, but also to ISIS, different versions of which are reconstituting themselves, by the way, all over the Middle East and in Africa. And we're going to wind up with the same problem that we had 25 years ago, and we're still going to be spending a lot of money trying to deal with that threat. At a second level of order, we also have to realize that many of our allies, especially in the Pacific, are asking themselves, how reliable is the United States? How much can we trust them? And last but not least, how willing is the United States to stand up by their friends and to follow a coherent strategy? By the way, international politics is not always about clear-cut endings. It's not about total victory or about defeat. Sometimes the best you can achieve is a long-term stalemate. We had that in Afghanistan, and President Biden's advisors actually gave him a blueprint for maintaining kind of a long-term stalemate at a very minimal cost in U.S. resources.
And clearly the president decided not to go that route. There's a lot of questions that we'll be asking on this in days and weeks to come. But for now, our thanks to John Mearsheimer, Cecile Shea, Alberto Cole, and Khalil Marar. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.